Time.com, Time magazine, put out an article that describes a coordinated campaign to ensure the, quote, proper outcome of the 2020 election. They outline a, quote, cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies, working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. This is not a joke. I will be quoting directly from the article published by Time. The link to the article is in the description. I'm going to touch on the key points and let you draw your own conclusions, unlike this cabal of elites who think we're all too stupid to vote for the correct candidate. I quote now from the Time article entitled, "The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election." There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, one that both curtailed the protests and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. The pact was formalized in a terse, little-noticed joint statement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and AFL-CIO, published on Election Day. Both sides would come to see it as a sort of implicit bargain, inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive racial justice protests, in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy. I want to interject and point out that they are mixing facts with opinion in a way that's hard to catch unless you're looking for it. They use the phrase Trump's assault on democracy as if that is a fact, when it's clearly this group's interpretation of what was happening. The Time magazine article continues. The handshake between business and labor was just one component of a vast, cross-partisan campaign to protect the election, an extraordinary shadow effort dedicated to not winning the vote, but to ensuring it would be free and fair, credible, and uncorrupted. For more than a year, a loosely organized coalition of operatives scrambled to shore up America's institutions as they came under simultaneous attack from a remorseless pandemic and an autocratically inclined president. Again, autocratically inclined is an interpretation, and what they call credible is unquestionably open for debate. Quoting again, "Their work touched every aspect of the election. They got states to change voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding. They fended off voter suppression lawsuits, recruited armies of poll workers, and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. They successfully pressured the social media companies to take a hard line against disinformation and use data-driven strategies to fight viral smears. I want to stress again that referring to legitimate news stories and questions about the loyalties and integrity of politicians as smears and disinformation is an opinion. And the question must be asked, how does getting millions of people to vote by mail contribute to ensuring a free and fair, credible, and uncorrupted election, as they claim? Time magazine continues. They executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote would unfold over days or weeks, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more traction. After Election Day, they monitored every pressure point to ensure that Trump could not overturn the result. Every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of the election was defeated, says Ian Basson, co-founder of Protect Democracy. But it's massively important for the country to understand that it didn't happen accidentally. The system didn't work magically. Democracy is not self-executing. It is, actually, but this group seemed to think that people need to have their perceptions influenced, as they say. You're not smart enough to make your own decision. After viewing all the evidence, you need to be steered in the right direction to ensure the proper outcome of the election, using their terms. Quoting again, "That's why the participants want the secret history of the 2020 election told, even though it sounds like a paranoid fever dream. A well-founded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies, working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. They were not rigging the election, they were fortifying it." Okay. "And they believe the public needs to understand the system's fragility in order to ensure democracy in America endures. Everything they just mentioned there sounds like an obstruction of a free and fair election. Influencing perceptions by steering media coverage to cover up stories that would hurt Democrats, controlling the flow of information. Does this sound like a group that wanted the voters to make up their own minds after hearing all the facts? Time magazine continues. Sometime in the fall of 2019, Mike Podhorzer became convinced the election was headed for disaster and determined to protect it. Podhorzer began circulating weekly number-crunching memos to a small circle of allies and hosting strategy sessions in D.C. But when he began to worry about the election itself, he didn't want to seem paranoid. It was only after months of research that he introduced his concerns in a newsletter in October 2019. Notice the date, 2019, which was long before COVID was even known about in the US. Suddenly, the potential for a November meltdown was obvious. Podhorzer began holding back-to-back Zoom meetings for hours a day with his network of contacts across the progressive universe. The labor movement, the institutional left, like Planned Parenthood and Greenpeace, resistance groups like Indivisible and Move On, progressive data geeks and strategists, representatives of donors and foundations, state-level grassroots organizers, racial justice activists, and others. If you think that group sounds a bit skewed toward the left side of the political spectrum, you're not alone. The meetings became the galactic center for a constellation of operatives across the left who shared overlapping goals but didn't usually work in concert. The group had no name, no leaders, and no hierarchy, but it kept the disparate actors in sync. Pod played a critical behind-the-scenes role in keeping different pieces of the movement infrastructure in communication and aligned, says Maurice Mitchell, National Director of the Working Families Party. You have the litigation space, the organizing space, the political people who are just focused on the W, and their strategies aren't always aligned. He allowed this ecosystem to work together. Protecting the election would require an effort of unprecedented scale. As 2020 progressed, it stretched to Congress, Silicon Valley, and the nation's state houses. It drew energy from the summer's racial justice protests, many of whose leaders were a key part of the Liberal Alliance. And eventually it reached across the aisle into the world of Trump-skeptical Republicans appalled by his attacks on democracy. I have to ask why only Trump-skeptical Republicans were helping here. I would think that if this effort was as noble and fair as they are claiming it is, you would have a wider variety of people involved and not just the bitter enemies of Trump. This cabal, to use their terminology, was decidedly against Trump and the Republicans. When you have such a polarizing figure as Trump running, who's to say what his opposition would be willing to do? Many on the left felt he was a dictator, literally as bad as Hitler, so why wouldn't they do everything in their power to make sure he was not elected again? I was criticized over a year ago when I posted a video questioning whether Google was unfairly influencing elections by to put it in the simplest of terms, showing positive results when you search for Trump's opponents and showing only negative when you search for Trump. Congress has held depositions with Google, Facebook, and Twitter executives inquiring about this very issue. So I think it's a fair question. Having access to all the relevant information may not matter for those who vote using their gut instinct or vote strictly along party lines. But for those who actually base their votes on facts and evidence and information about the candidate, manipulating search results in favor of one candidate or one party can make it decidedly more difficult for the truth seekers to find accurate information upon which to base their opinions. This principle applies to more than just politics as well. Returning to the Time article, we know exactly what Trump was going to do. He was going to try to use the fact that the Democrats voted by mail and Republicans voted in person to make it look like he was ahead, claim victory, say the mail-in votes were fraudulent, and try to get them thrown out, says Protect Democracy's Basson. Setting public expectation ahead of time helped undercut those lies. Well, that's the last bit of the Time article I'm going to read. So they're using this extremely wide and generalized assumption that all Republicans voted in person and all Democrats voted by mail. Even with limited anecdotal evidence, you can obviously confirm that's not true. We all remember the phrase red mirage from the election cycle. They said that it would appear as though Trump was winning because all Republicans were voting in person, and they counted those votes first. And the Democrats were mailing their votes, which would not be counted until later. Anyone on social media around the time of the 2020 election remembers the absurd, intrusive amount of banners at the top of the social media apps when you open them up. They said things like, "The election has not been called yet. Many states are still counting their votes," or "Voting by mail is safe and secure." The political establishment are not doing much to prove that democracy matters to them at all. The second impeachment provides all the evidence that I need to prove that. By their own admission, the people pushing for the impeachment of a former U.S. president are doing so because if they don't, the idiot, deplorable Trump voters might actually vote him in again. How's that for democracy? And they dare to call themselves Democrats. Let me know what you all think about this down in the comments. Thanks for listening. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel for future videos and ring that bell icon. If you would drop a like on the video and comment, that would be great as well. I'll see you in the next one.